Hello, and welcome to a Sunny Book Nook. Today I'm going to be giving you my August wrap-up, because August slipped away into a moment in time, so here we are. In the month of August, I read 13 books, and that is a little bit lower than previous months, mostly because I've been traveling, just got back to St. Louis. Also, my friends came and stayed with me for a little while, and we spent a lot of time together. That was really fun. And, I've just been kind of busy, so that's my excuse, I guess. But 13 books is still quite a few, so I'm excited to get through all of them with you today. And, let's just get right into it. I'm going to be starting with the books that I first read at the beginning of the month all the way to the books that I read at the end of the month. So the first book that I read in August was Late to the Party by Kelly Quinlan. This book is a YA contemporary sapphic coming-of-age novel about a teenage girl who feels like she is late to the party in terms of doing the teenage things. Like, her friends feel like she isn't doing enough. Her friends feel like none of them have really had their first kiss yet. None of them have really experienced much of the typical high school experience, so that's kind of their goal for the summer. But our main character is an artist, and she's a little bit more reserved and shy, and she isn't really that interested in branching out that much, but she ends up kind of stumbling into a new friend group and a new sort of situation when her two best friends, go to a party without her, and she goes to pick them up and stumbles across two boys kissing in the woods, and those two boys are very popular sort of sporty jock guys who are in the closet and not out, and so she kind of gets looped into their secret, and she becomes friends with one of the boys, and she herself is a lesbian and knows she's gay, and it's not like a big deal, I guess, because both of her friends are also queer, and her best friend, who's a girl, is bisexual, and her other best friend, who's a boy, is gay. So she's not really an odd one out within her own friend group, but her whole family and everyone around her sees her as someone who's kind of limited to these two other people in her life, whereas she sees herself as her own person, and as she's branching out into different friend groups and hanging out with these new friends that she's making, she's not really telling her close best friends from childhood, and they seem to be kind of drifting apart in weird ways, and she's getting involved with this girl that she met at the party, and it's just a whole scenario, and it's all played out over the course of a summer, I think in Atlanta or New Orleans, a southern city, basically. I'm forgetting which one exactly, but it's very central to this city, and she has a job at this gift shop. It's very much a summer contemporary story about high schoolers and their comings and goings and their relationships and the ways that they drift apart and their conflicts and the ways they try to resolve those conflicts. I thought that it was really, really heartwarming and really sweet. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's a really solid Kelly Quinlan, but I don't think Kelly Quinlan writes bad books. I think she's a really good contemporary young adult author, and she always writes sapphic main characters and sapphic storylines, which I really appreciate, and I think they're done really well. And this book was also very heart-wrenching and relatable in many ways, and just all about that teenage angst and drama, but not in any too detailed way, I guess. It kind of stays on the surface of things, I feel, but I feel a lot of contemporary YAs do that. But I think that Kelly Quinlan does what Becky Albertalli tries to do in her stories, but in a much better way, to be quite honest. So, not to pit women against each other or whatever, but I do think it's done pretty well. Yeah, I rated this 4 stars on Goodreads, which you can find me on Goodreads, by the way, if you would like to. Although, let me know how you found me, because I usually don't accept friend requests that don't answer my challenge question on Goodreads, because I like to know who the people I'm becoming Goodreads friends with, how they know me. Anyway, okay, so on Goodreads, the review I gave it was Betty in August by Taylor Swift, because it very much gave me Betty in August vibes in terms of that summer fling, that summer thing. And if I showed up at your party, will you kiss me on the porch in front of all your stupid friends? And if you kiss me, will it be just how I dreamed of? Will it patch my broken wings? I'm only 17, I don't know anything, but I know I miss you. Standing in your cardigan. It's very much giving that. Like, those lyrics, it's this book, in my opinion. The next book I read in the month of August was Universal Love by Alexander Weinstein. This book is a short story collection of speculative sci-fi short stories, and I really enjoyed this. I thought that it was very intelligent, and the sort of dystopian future worlds that it presents and the various characters that are presented, I thought were really interesting and intelligent, and I had a good time. I really tend to enjoy speculative short story collections, so I rated this book 4 stars. The next book I read in the month of August was Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney, and this book was so fucking good. Oh my god. So I got access to this book, despite it being a September release, through the Libro FM influencer program, their ALC program. Libro FM is a leading audiobook seller in contrast to Audible, but Libro FM connects itself to the independent booksellers across the US, as opposed to, it being its own mega corporation. So it's a better alternative to Audible in many ways. But anyway, so on Libro FM, I listened to Beautiful World, Where Are You, which is Sally Rooney's anticipated third release. And this book, I feel, elevates her writing to a new height, in my opinion, because I loved Normal People, I loved Conversations with Friends, but both of those books are 4-star reads, 4.5-star reads for me, probably, but this book was a 5-star read. Absolutely, blew me the fuck away. It was stunning and gorgeous and just so good, and, I came in with high expectations, and they were met, and exceeded. I think that this book combines the best elements of Normal People and Conversations with Friends, that sort of tension within relationships, the conflicts within long-term friendships or new loves or old loves, also with the commentary and discourse about what it's like to live in the contemporary world, what it's like to engage with technology and social media as a young adult, dealing with late capitalism and existing at the expense of other people, and the way that you can survive within this world. And it also touches on and gives insight on the publishing world, because there is a very clearly self-insert character in Beautiful World, Where Are You, named Alice, who is an author and has recently gotten a lot of acclaim and success due to one of her books, but she's really grappling with, why is my book even this successful? What makes me deserving of this success? And also all these other writers who are very successful and well-known, and all the events that they go to, and the awards that they win, and the awards that I win, and the thoughts that I'm supposed to share on for other people to hear my thoughts. Why are my thoughts important? These other people who write books and stuff, what do they know about life? I know them, and I've met them, and they don't know shit. They're just out-of-touch rich people, and maybe that's who I'm becoming. It was just so interesting, the conversations that the characters in this book have, as well as the nature of their relationships. It was really fascinating and deeply realistic, I think. And I think that Sally Rooney, her commitment to hyper-realism in her novels it's just so wonderful for me to see, because so much of literature is a romanticization of reality. It is a distorted view of reality, and it presents a narrative that is almost escapist from reality. But Sally Rooney really creates characters who feel like people, analyzes reality through literature, as opposed it's very, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it. But this book is sort of told in an epistolary style in some ways, because the different chapters are sort of separated by these two characters writing emails to each other. So the two characters whom we're in the perspectives of mostly is Alice, the author, and then Eileen, her friend from college. They were like roommates and best friends, and they still are very close. And Alice, at the very beginning of the book, has just left a mental hospital because she's had a nervous breakdown, and she's moved to this old house in some like countryside. She's like met this Tinder hookup guy, and they develop this weird sort of relationship. And then Eileen, her friend, is working at a small literary magazine in Dublin, I believe, and she has this childhood crush, who is one of her good friends now, whom she's in an on and off again relationship with. Eileen and Alice write emails to each other, sort of contemplating like life at large and their thoughts on beauty and capitalism and technology and literature and the state of these things, as well as their own lives. But beyond the epistolary nature of this book, we also like see these people go through their lives on a day-to-day basis and their actual goings about and everything. It was so masterfully done, I think, and very hopeful at the end. That also deals a lot with like climate anxiety and how the political situation of any given point in the contemporary age is so necessary to provide context of any given time. Like, it's impossible to write a contemporary novel set in contemporary times without exactly framing who is president and what conflicts are going on and what nations are at war. I don't know, there are so many fascinating and interesting conversations in here that both expanded my thinking and reflected the conversations and thoughts that I have in my day-to-day life that I just thought was so intelligent and not pretentious at all, because that's a criticism Sally Rooney gets a lot, but I don't think she's pretentious. I think that she is a literature student and a writer, and she writes about the things that she knows, and it's pretty accurate to life, in my opinion. Love that book. Highly recommend it, and I'm so excited for it to be released because I can't wait to get a hard cover edition of it alongside my hard cover edition of Normal People. So the next book I read in the month of August was SelfCare by Lee Stein. This book is a book that personifies girl boss culture before girl boss is like a meme or like a thing, because in this book we're following these two women who are like co-CEOs of a company that is a self-care app for women. And basically we follow these two characters and their varying class backgrounds, because one of them is from a working class background and she's always grown up poor, and the other one is incredibly rich and both of her parents died, so she's living off of her inheritance basically. And they have a company together, and the one who is like poor is the one who runs a lot of it, and she's like in charge of a lot of the logistics behind the company, whereas the woman who's like rich is the one who's like the face of the company. She's the one who does all of the workouts and tries all these spa treatments and is very invested in new age spirituality and this really white woman type of way. Oh, and by the way, both of these people are white. This almost satirical look at white women, white feminism, the corporate world, the commodification and capitalization of shit like self-care. And it's very funny and sad and dark and twisted, and it also deals with gendered violence and gender in this really interesting way, as well as like trauma, healing, money, eating disorders, binge drinking, alcoholism, binge eating, like all of these things in a way that is very millennial depressed woman type of stuff. And it's also really dealing with like the internet a lot and internet culture, obviously, because this is like a social media app that they're trying to create. And this book is set in 2017, so right after Trump's election, so that's like sort of talked about a lot, and that is also the sort of political backdrop of what's going on, because at the very beginning of the book, I think one of the co-founders gets attacked on Twitter, or like has a lot of Twitter buzz because she made like a vague threat against like Ivanka Trump or something like that. I don't know, some shit that isn't fully shown to us as the reader, but is clearly an element of this story. So it is very much dealing with like internet culture and the relationship that it has with like feminism and discourse. But not only are we seeing these two characters' perspective, we're also getting the perspective of a woman named Khadija, who is the like token black woman on their team, and she is pregnant. She does not know how to break it to her boss because things are so crazy, and you know, the workplace is it's like everything is coming one after the other. It's a wild ride. It's an unhappy book. But it's not melancholy. It's like realistic and grounded in reality in this dark way. It's dark in the way that reality is. It's satirical in the way that neoliberal feminism is fundamentally like a satire of feminism. I thought this book was pretty intelligent, pretty fast-paced, and interesting. I know some people might say that this is like boring or whatever, but I liked it, so I rated it 3.5 stars, and it is the complete embodiment of girl boss, gaslight, gatekeep, 100%. So the next book that I read was a novella, which you can find on The New Yorker. I'll link it below if you want to go check it out. It's pretty short. This novella is titled Many Little Makes by Sarah Shanlian Bynum. This book, or this novella, is one that me and my podcast co-host, which if you haven't seen our video together, reading 1-star reviews of our favorite books, you should go check it out. Or if you don't already subscribe to our podcast, go subscribe. But me and her read this novella and talked about it for the podcast. If you want to hear my full thoughts on it, you can go listen to that episode. I'll also link it down below. And I rated this novella 4 stars because I think that it was a really interesting exploration of girlhood, nostalgia, memory, and the ways that grief and childhood can shape you as an adult woman, the relationships that we have with our mothers and with our friends. And it was just a really sweet look at like almost suburban girlhood friendship between these 3 girls. At the very beginning of the novella, we get an email from one of the other friends to our main character, and then it kind of leads into the sort of flashback, or not even flashback, but recollection of their childhoods together leading up to the present day. And it was really touching and heartwarming in a lot of ways, and it really explored something that we thematically talk about a lot on the podcast, which is like that intimacy of girlhood friendship and the queerness of understanding your burgeoning like sexuality and identity as a girl, as a teenage girl, and as you get older, and the conflicts that arise within your friendships and the ways that they maintain themselves even despite them and after high school and college and everything. So I thought it was really sweet, and I rated this novella 4 stars. The next book that I read was The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. This is a fantasy novel following a girl who gets like sacrificed to the people called the Woodsman, who like work for the king. Our main character is from this village on kind of the outskirts of this kingdom, and every year one of those girls gets taken by the Woodsman and brought to the kingdom, but no one knows what happens to those girls. So basically, our main character gets taken to the king, but there's a whole political and religious system and conflict going on here, overarching and driving the entire story, where the kingdom is kind of like trying to pursue a religious ethno-state almost, and there obviously exists people who follow other religions within the kingdom, including our main character and the community that she comes from. But at the very beginning of the book, when our main character, the wolf girl, is taken by the woodsman, all of the woodsmen die except the captain in some sort of attack in the woods. And so then they have to go on this like quest together, basically. This is, I think, rooted in Jewish folklore and mythology, I believe, and it also has a lot to do with like faith, because we find out early on in the book that the captain of the woodsmen is actually the king's son, and he is out on a mission to try to find something that will prevent war for the king and the kingdom. His older brother is a sort of religious fanatic and sort of galvanizing the peasants, who are also because of their suffering are also religious fanatics, basically. It was just a really wild time. Like, it was very much a fantasy, very much an exploration of identity within the context of the world this novel builds. I think that it was intricate enough in a lot of ways, and the world building was like fine and our characters were fine. It was all pretty mediocre, honestly. I wasn't that gripped or interested the entire time reading this. I did not really care what was going on or what happened next a lot of the time, but I can recognize that objectively it's a pretty solidly constructed novel. I mean, I don't even remember a lot of the story at this point, because it just wasn't that memorable to me. So I just don't think this book was for me, but I think it was like fine. I rated this book 3 stars. The next book that I read in the month of August was The Only Living Girl on Earth by Charles Yu. I think this is like a Scribd original audiobook. It was really short, but I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really interesting. It kind of reminded me of one of my favorite books of all time, The Hike by Drew Marguerite, because it's set in the distant future where everyone lives on different planets now, and Earth has basically been abandoned, and there's only one girl on Earth now, as the title suggests, and the girl living on Earth is running like this gift shop that is the entirety of Earth at this point, for random space travelers who come and, do tourism there. But each chapter, it's sort of like a Russian doll of a book. We see the sort of larger things of scale of what's happening, and then we kind of unpack what's going on Earth and like the history of this gift shop basically, and then one of the rides within what used to be the amusement park there, and then but like it's very trippy, it's very wild. It was very Black Mirror, Truman Showy. It was so fascinating in such a short amount of time too. So I thought that it was really interesting. I mean, maybe I'm making it out to be more interesting and more thought-provoking than it actually is, because I was definitely listening to it when I was high, and I definitely, as soon as I finished listening to it, had to listen to it again. And honestly, when I talk about it or think about this book, it makes me want to like go listen to it again, because like, whoa. But yeah, I rated this book 4 stars. I thought that it was really good. I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was Agatha of Little Neon by Claire Luchette. This book is about a nun and follows the course of her life, kind of follows her throughout the decades, I think starting probably like in the 80s or something like that, and she and her sisters move from one place to another, the little neon house, where they take care of some people within this community, and also our main character goes and teaches at a local school, at a local Catholic school. It was such a sweet and sentimental book that also dealt with, like Catholicism and faith, and also reality and uncovering of the abuse that happened within the Catholic Church of priests and children. How our main character as a nun is kind of grappling with this sort of gendered hierarchy and violence that happens within this church, or within this book. It's presented in this really subtle way, and in a really warm and understanding and beautifully rendered way, in which the sisterhood between these women and the relationships that they have with each other, and the strength and bond of everything, and their prevailing tenderness with each other is, and their belief in service and their full dedication to their faith in their lives and their lifestyles. It was so beautiful to see. I love this book so much, and our main character is also a lesbian and she is aware of it, but obviously she doesn't like tell anyone. She just knows that it's true of herself. I just thought it was such a sweet and wonderful book, and it's so underrated. It's so beautiful and touching. So I rated it 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was Girls with Sharp Sticks by Suzanne Young. This book is a young adult dystopian sci-fi novel set in sort of like an alternative modern day or present day. You don't really know until later, but we're following these girls at this academy, and they are taught to be prim and proper and respectful to men and reverent to men. Their behaviors and their appearances are dictated by men and their desires. And these girls are controlled by the men at their school, who are known as either their professors or the guardians. And basically, stuff is really whack, and they are very much controlled over. There's a lot of abuse of power and manipulation going on here, but these girls are sort of unaware of it until one of the girls starts acting kind of weird. And they also discover this book of poetry called Girls with Sharp Sticks, and it's about these girls who revolt against their oppressors, who are men, and yeah, like, basically that incites a sort of awakening within a lot of these girls, and they uncover some very interesting things about their school and about each other and about themselves. So I thought this book was pretty good for a young adult dystopian novel. I think a lot of young adult dystopian books are very overdone and, like, not intelligent, but I think this book was fairly intelligent in a lot of what it's saying, and I can't really describe exactly what it is beyond, obviously, like, the feminist themes without spoiling this book, but I thought it was fairly good. I don't think that the feminist politics within this book are that complicated, are that nuanced, or that subtle, obviously, but I don't think it's really trying to be. But I also think that it did a really interesting job at looking at systems of oppression and power and resistance, and through the eyes of and through the perspective of a character who is fundamentally taught to and been socialized to not be resistant in many ways. And the emotional manipulation that all of these girls suffer at the school is so horrifying to see, and this book really takes a sharp turn into horror at a lot of points. It was definitely very creepy, and definitely huge trigger warnings for a lot of types of gendered violence, but again, it was still a young adult sci-fi dystopian novel, and it did dive off into some cringy, cliche, almost like predictable sort of curves at some points, but you know, that's just kind of to be expected, I guess. So I rated this book 3.5 stars. The next book that I read in August was Machine Hood by S.B. Divya. This book is a sci-fi novel that is set many years into the future, well, not many years, like towards the end of the 21st century and into the 22nd century. Basically, technology and AI has been developed to the point where there is a rebellion group called the Machine Hood that is basically demanding rights for machine objects and for machine intelligence, and it's disrupting the lives of many people because they're like doing terrorist attacks and stuff. So we're following the perspectives of these two people primarily, these two women. One of them is a mother, and she lives in Chennai in India, biology researcher, like she's a sort of researcher basically, and her husband like works these various gig jobs because in this world, due to the technology and the advancement of labor and stuff, like there's a lot of like gig jobs that can happen through just technology. And the other perspective that we follow is this fighter, this like gig fighter basically, and she used to work in the US military, but after this mission was sabotaged by the president, she was like, fuck this, I'm not doing this shit anymore, and is now doing like sort of mercenary work, you know, mercenary for hire type shit, but because obviously she is like a fighter, and because in this world technology is so integrated into everyone's realities, and everyone takes these pills that are created every day by like the government and by the research and health facilities of every country. They're like antimicrobial pills that will prevents you from contracting diseases and stuff, because it's like advanced to the point in the world where there's been a lot of pandemics and a lot of huge wipeouts of human populations due to diseases. So now everyone has to take preventative pills every single day, and it's just a part of, you know, normal reality. There's a technology of there's like cameras everywhere and like a lot of implants inside your brain and stuff, so that like Siri is in your head as opposed to on your phone. Like the phones are not a thing. You can just like speak to other people when you try to project onto them. The technology is very interesting and also pretty realistic in terms of how it's described, of how the progression of the world like led up to the point where some sort of types of technology are kind of ubiquitous. The mercenary character, she gets looped into this other mission going on because of the Machine Hood's threats. She's suffering from like seizures and stuff because of the zips that she takes, which are these sort of like enhancers of her abilities. So as, you know, a fighter, she has to take performance enhancing like drugs, and that's just a normal reality for most people. The same way that everyone who like does a lot of high mental energy work takes a type of drug that like makes them work faster and harder and elevates their brain power to like work at a different level, to work at a higher level. Everyone takes drugs and technology that elevates their bodies and enhances their performance and elevates their labor, especially within the context of the fact that everyone has technology like implanted within themselves, including like children. And we see that in the way that the mother interacts with her children and her family. And it was a really interesting book, so deliberate, so specific and detailed in this way that only sci-fi can be, and touched on that topic of like what makes life, like what determines something as human and not, and what does higher intelligence even like mean, and like how do we determine what entities, what living beings has rights and doesn't, and the perspectives that our various characters hold. And our mercenary character is related to the mother character because they are like sibling-in-laws, like the mercenary's brother is married to her, and because the mother is like a bio researcher, the mercenary starts having I forgot what I was saying. She starts having seizures, so the mother starts doing research into why she's having seizures, and it's tied to the use of zips, the performance enhancing drugs. And our main character's mother died from using a specific kind of performance enhancing drugs that enhances like your thinking, critical thinking, as opposed to your body. So she has avoided the drug enhancing critical thinking for her entire life to avoid the fate of her mother, but now she's like, you know, the zips are ruining her body. It was just a fascinating book. It was so fast-paced, so well done. The relationships and the characterizations were so fleshed out and realistic. The conversations about labor and capitalism and technology and equality and freedom, liberation, war, and resistance fronts, and the way that people adapt to the world and how in times of crisis people respond. It was so interesting and just really, really smart, really well done and compelling. I thoroughly enjoyed it, so I rated it 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was the second book in the Girls with Sharp Sticks series, and that is Girls with Razor Hearts by Suzanne Young. And I rated this book 3.5 stars because, well, I can't really describe what the book is about without spoiling the first book, so I'm just gonna say, yeah, I liked it. I thought it was fine. I think that it dealt with gendered violence on a different level, in a different way, and feminism in a different way, in a different setting, in a really interesting way that I appreciated. The next book that I read in the month of August was The Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting by KJ Charles, because after all of that hard sci-fi, I wanted to delve myself into some queer historical fiction romance. This is a male romance between this guy who is of this sibling pair who has just arrived in London and is dazzling and stunning all the London elites and nobility with their charm and grace, but they are running away from stuff and they do not have much money. So their goal from being in London is to, like, you know, marry rich and be settled and well off. But the other perspective that we're following is the uncle of the niece that the brother in the sibling duo is pursuing. The uncle is very suspicious, as he should be, of the brother and thinks that he is a fortune hunter, because fortune hunters are people who, like, intentionally seek out rich people to marry, and they aren't rich themselves, and they're, like, being hush-hush about it, and it's, like, a manipulative thing, I guess. I don't know. So the sort of tension that arises between that man and the other man leads to, like, sexual tension and chemistry and romance, and yeah, I thought it was really sweet. I really liked it. I thought it was fun, and I think that the ways that, like, feminism and gender is, and class and money and family relationships and commitment and love and romance and queerness within this time and being gay within this time, it's all done in a way that I think was so artful, delightful, fun, heartwarming, and just lovely. KJ Charles writing is just a fucking delight to me. So I devoured this book, I fucking loved it, and I rated it 5 stars because the banter, the sexual tension, the romance, everything, so fun. And then I read another KJs Charles, which was Unfit to Print, and this book is following these 2 characters who are both men of color, and they were childhood besties, but were separated by like force because one of them was like abandoned by his family after his father died, and he is half black, and the other character is Indian because he and his family moved from India to Britain, and this is all like in the 19th century or something like that. So they both met at like this, private school for boys. But now the Indian boy is a lawyer who is working for Indian independence from Britain and is also working on behalf of immigrants' rights and poor people's rights and labor rights within Britain. And the other one is a porn smut bookseller. He owns a bookshop in like a part of town that's like known as, like the bad part of town or whatever, and he sells like smut, and he also writes like raunchy books and stuff. The lawyer is like investigating a missing persons case. He stumbles across the bookshop that the bookseller and writer runs, and they're like, I haven't seen you in 13 fucking years, what the hell? And they like reunite, and there is sexual tension and a reuniting of their childhood friendship and bonding over their shared and varying traumas and catching up and their varying approaches to life, because the bookseller, after he got, disowned and kicked out of his family, like he struggled a lot in terms of getting back on his feet and the shit that he had to do to be able to survive. Very difficult for him. But our other character, the lawyer, felt really abandoned when one day he went back to school and like his best friend was no longer there anymore, and no one would tell him what happened to him, and he just presumed that he was dead. It was very interesting. And it also, this book talks a lot about like sex work and prostitution, especially with like queer men and like poor young boys, and their varying approaches to life, because as a lawyer, our lawyer character is very like, people are exploited and poor. This is really sick that like people are selling pictures of themselves to these rich old men who hate them and have power and denigrate them with their own power when secretly like indulging in the things that they create to be illegal. The bookseller character, who himself was involved in like the sex trade and is himself writes like smut and like sells, illegal stuff within the Victorian era, like, sex not allowed. He's very like, you're gonna do whatever you need to put food on the table because that's what I had to do. The lawyer character is like, what the hell? Like, why didn't you just come to my family and like ask us for help? Like, it would have been fun. Like, and so their sort of dynamic and relationship over these things, and then they're also their approach to like sexuality, because the lawyer character is very uptight, like has not done anything, is really like shy, like he's so focused on his work, like he hasn't really thought about that, whereas our other character is really experienced and like doesn't want to have any sort of strong emotional or romantic bond with anyone that he sleeps with. So like they're coming from really different experiences, but obviously they were childhood friends and they were really close, and now they're like reuniting and they're both trying to solve this case together. It was just so sweet, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun. The pacing was really good. I rated this book 4 stars because the tropes that this book has, like the childhood friends to lovers situation, like not knowing each other for 13 years, suddenly runs into each other situation. Like, I don't know if that's like my thing. It was still really good, but like it didn't necessarily hit on the tropes that I really enjoy. Yeah, I rated it 4 stars. Most recently, I finished the book The Ruin of the Rake by Cat Sebastian because I was still craving that historical fiction romance, as you know. And this book was also very fun, lovely, delightful. I rated it 4 stars. It's about this man who is very uptight and posh and known to all of society as a very posh man, but like no one really knows him as a friend. He's just known as like the bachelor that anyone can invite to their dinner party, and like he'll be fine because he's very good at being charming, and polite. And he has a sister who is in a sort of unhappy marriage because she hasn't seen her husband in many years. She's also a scientist and does a lot of research and is a, she's a STEM girly. She's seen as kind of like an eccentric and has a bunch of friends in varying places, and she doesn't really care that much about propriety and niceness and like all that sort of regal shit. She's not really that interested in it. So she's friends with some notorious figures. One of them being this Rake. And a Rake, if you don't know, within historical romances and stuff, a Rake is just someone who's has a bad reputation, and everyone knows that he has a bad reputation. He's the bad boy of historical romances. So she is friends with this Rake, and this Rake is trying to get back in his family's good graces so that he can like hang out with his nephew before he like leaves the country. But in order to do that, he has to improve his social standing. But his social standing has been sort of even more denigrated than it already is through this recently published book that everyone was talking about that is very clearly based off of him and cast him as like a villain. And so that is kind of ruining his reputation. So over the course of this book, we see these two people kind of have a forced proximity, enemies to lovers relationship, because in order to improve the reputation of the Rake, the sister sets the Rake up with her brother and is like, y'all should hang out in public so more people can like see that he has respectable company, so that way the word will get back to his uncle and like he can go hang out with his nephew. Throughout the course of that, they start having some like sexual tension through their enemies shit. I read this book 4 stars. I liked it, and I thought that obviously the sexual tension, really fun to read about, the varying romantic situations, really cute. A lot of the different tropes were stuff that I really appreciated, like the enemies to lovers stuff, the sick bed stuff, and also the internal struggles that both of our characters had in terms of the ways that they present themselves to outward society versus the people that they truly are, and then who they know that they can be with each other, like in the way that they grow to that point. It was just so lovely for me to see. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. That is all the books that I read in the month of August. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if any of these books that I talked about interested you, or if you've read any of them and what your thoughts are. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe, all that bullshit. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!